Hello, my dear listener, and welcome back to another mystical guest episode of the Emily the Mystic Show podcast. And I had the pleasure of receiving an amazing intuitive astrology reading from today's guest, who is Gabrielle Celeste. And I cannot wait for you to get to know her today because she's going to be filling us in on everything we need to know from an astrological perspective for the upcoming summer season, as well as her depth and well of wisdom about the astrology space and the spiritual space. So I can't wait to get into it with you. Gabrielle is an intuitive astrologist who has conducted over 500 channeled astrology readings. She is the co-host of internationally recognized podcast, the Spiritual Sisters podcast, and owner of Agua Astrology. Gabrielle specializes in marrying her intuitive gifts with her training as an astrologist to help her clients discover their subconscious blocks and limiting beliefs by way of their natal birth charts. This allows her clients to work with predictive and upcoming energy that aligns with their goals and the timeline for their greatest and highest good. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited and thrilled to be here. I'm a big fan of your work, and I very much admire the business that you've built.
Oh, thank you so much for that reflection. I appreciate it. And I can't wait to dive into your magic today, Gabrielle. So can you share with us where you are located in the world?
Yeah, I am in Southern California in sunny San Diego.
Sunny San Diego. We love it. Amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like that's such the spiritual capital of the US in like a lot of ways. That and Sedona.
You know what? I've come to realize that I was like, oh, like the energy here, it just moves differently. And I was attracted to this area for a lot of different reasons. I recently moved within the last year, but I'm starting to see exactly that. So very true.
That's awesome. Yeah. And can you share with us your astrology, sun, moon, and rising?
Yeah, lots of water. I am a Cancer sun, Pisces moon, Pisces rising.
Ooh, so much water. My Pisces sun, which you already know because we've talked about that. I love that combination. Mm-hmm. And what is your human design type?
I am a 4-6 sacral generator.
Very cool. I love this. And what does that combination that you just shared, what does that mean to you, Gabrielle?
Ooh, well, it's a lot of flow. And it's really interesting because off camera, you and I had spoken about like the current work that I'm doing and whatnot. And I'm definitely working on my grounding and my lower three, my root, the sacral, and the solar. And I'm leaning more into my femininity more than ever before. And I feel like those signs and then my human design makeup are essentially like divine feminine energy. So it's really interesting to embody more of that and to learn more of where my time desires, I should say. Desires is the right word, to be focused as I teeter more towards the feminine and the masculine and come back into balance.
Definitely. And I feel like so many of us women are on that journey right now of being in balance with both. And I know for me personally, because I went to business school and worked for so much of my life in the corporate world, I tended to lean more towards masculine energy. And every single year since I've really been on this deep and spiritual journey and spiritual business journey, it's really unfolded that whole divine feminine experience. So I can't wait to chat with you more on that today.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how I got into this work as well. So very similar.
I love it. So let's start there. How did we get here? Can you dive into your story for us?
Yeah, it's that thing called the Saturn return that I feel like it's everyone. If you're not on path, you're going to be put on path during that season that I like to refer to as your astrological induction and initiation into adulthood. And, you know, I think prior to that, I was very just programmed and unconscious. And I had very much had an interest in this work. And it just was like, no, that's not true. Like very much just pushed that out of the way and denied that part of myself. But when I came into my Saturn return and I didn't know any of the lingo and what was going on at the time, I found myself involved in a very wild 4-year investigation involving the United States government, so the FBI and the Department of Justice. And they essentially investigated the company that I was working for at the time. And a lot of my 20s, now looking back, I'm like, okay, like it's paid off. And this is the purpose of what my time in that corporate world was for. It was skill set building. But in my 20s, a lot of my time was focused on building a whole West Coast department for a Fortune 500 company that illegally put in software into their vehicles that essentially polluted the environment. And so towards the end of that 4-year investigation, that was what it incurred an internal investigation. And in that internal investigation, I was made to be the fall guy for that. And it was essentially divine orchestration pushing me out into doing my aligned work and what I'm supposed to do in this lifetime, which is the spiritual work. So long story short, short story long. But in that internal investigation, I essentially knew exactly what was going to happen, what they were going to do. And I'm like, okay, like you are intuitive and you're meant to be doing this for, as your purpose in this lifetime. And I came across astrology and just helped me make sense of myself and my skill sets, my characteristics, areas of improvements, challenges. And my girlfriend introduced me she studied Vedic and I studied Placidus, but she introduced me to Vedic astrology. And up until that point, I didn't even know what my birth time was. And she showed me my birth chart and I was hooked and I've been studying it ever since.
Wow. My gosh. What an interesting journey. That's wild.
It gets better, girl. Like that was like the introduction. And then I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, like, please bring me into like a position that's going to help me to build my practice, And so I ended up finding a remote job and it didn't start off this way, but it was in clinical research. And then the company I worked for was awarded the 2nd generation COVID vaccines. So like to work for a company, I legally can't say their name because I signed an NDA, but you can Google it. They were founded by Nazis. And then prior to that, working for the IRS, for the tax department. It's crazy to have the experiences that I have from the workplace and now to be doing this work. I was like, okay, it's skill set building. That's what we're going to label it as.
Oh my gosh. So you have been on the other side of like the governmental illusion.
Like all facets of it, it really seems like and feels like. And it's like, no, you're really meant to like, communicate with other sides and different forms of consciousness that are not human. So yeah, I love sharing that story, but I'm just like, okay, like there's definitely more to this world. And I feel like I'm an example of that and a testament to being true.
Yeah. So did you go through a journey where you felt like the veil was crumbled or broken down and you really started to see kind of what you thought your concept of reality was kind of collapse
100%.
And starting to see things kind of unfold in a different way?
Absolutely. And it was during my Saturn return. So I have a 12th house Saturn and it's a pretty gnarly placement. And the way that I see it now, I was like, oh, like a lot of it felt like I was in isolation at the time. And I feel like I was because I don't think really anyone around me, like they knew the severity of what I was going through, but internally, I don't think they knew it. Honestly, Emily, it felt like now looking back, borderline psychosis. But now I'm like, oh, like that's just kind of sometimes the energy of bordering and living between two worlds at once, which is very much the nature of, I feel like, the work that we do.
Oh, 100%. Yes. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. So fascinating. And I would love to know too, can you explain to the listener, maybe someone who doesn't know what this is, can you explain to us what the Saturn return is and what it means for someone?
Absolutely. So Saturn is a planet that takes anywhere for 27 to 30 years to make a full orbit around the sun and the constellations. And it is the planet that is the representative of karma, of lessons. He's often referred to as Daddy Saturn, and he certainly feels that way. But the thing about the Saturn return, it takes about 2.5 to 3 years, and you're certainly feeling that energy and you're feeling the buildup of it. But depending on where that Saturn falls in your chart, which house it falls into, and the constellations that it falls into, you're really going to get an idea of how your Saturn return is going to affect you about every 28 to 30 years. So the first one hits around 28 to 30. And the second one's like 57 to 60 in that ballpark. And then the last one's like 87 to 90 that most people may or may not make it to. But Saturn, if you work with the challenges, the lessons, the karma that the planet's presenting to you, it pays off. And I always tell, my friends or people that I know are coming up on their return, it's like, yes, it's challenging. And yes, the first year and a half is pretty rough, depending on what degree it falls at in your chart, but it pays off and it's so worth it after it to work with what that planet is presenting to you.
And for you, was this journey unfolding during Saturn in Aquarius or Saturn in Pisces?
Saturn in Aquarius. It was rough. It was rough out there. So it was happening when the world was pretty much like burning down, figuratively speaking.
Oh my goodness. And because you're now on the other side of your Saturn return,
Yeah.
what have you noticed or felt that's unfolded for you in your life since moving through that?
I mean, I was definitely placed on a timeline that was, I think, mirrored to me that it's for my greatest and my highest good. So Saturn, again, it depends on where he's at in your chart, and mine's in the 12th. So he's been navigating through my 12th and now my first house from, Pisces. So Aquarius, lots of Pisces, and going into my first, which has 28 degrees of Aries in it. So it's been very much like a season of transformation, rebirth, endings, new beginnings. But I really feel as though that was the opportunity for my soul to become conscious in the 3D form, and for me to really be awake to the work and to acknowledge that there is life outside of, planet Earth and this human experience.
Absolutely. And I know for me, because I'm wrapping up my Saturn return with Saturn being in Pisces, and now
Mhm.
it's moving into Aries. And just for my listener to know, depending on my own schedule, I'm planning on releasing an episode that's like a Saturn return reveal episode
Yay, I
and
love
a
that.
review of like everything that I've been through, because I have so much to say on this topic. But I am so curious, and I want us to chat now about, with Saturn changing signs again, maybe your thoughts on what you see. So Saturn is moving now from Pisces into Aries. So Gabrielle, like, what does that energetic shift and change mean for us as a collective? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Saturn's, I love when these planets do like almost like peekaboo transits. So like Jupiter does this a lot. Well, they'll transit, their ingress is what it's formally called, into that constellation that they're moving into for about 2 to 3 years, at least for Saturn. Jupiter takes 1 year to go through a constellation. And Saturn's going into Aries this coming Saturday at time of recording, May 24th. And he's going to dip back in and finish his story arc in Pisces after September 1st. So we have this summer to really get an energetic preview, so to speak, of what 2026 and 20 through 2028 will feel like with Saturn moving into Aries. And Saturn doesn't like being in Aries. He loves being in Libra, and Libra and Aries, they're opposite signs of one another. And so what that looks like is Saturn in Aries, it kind of feels as though it's like Aries is the forefront. It's the first sign of the zodiac. So it's very much beginning energy. It's innovation. It rules over just anything that would be considered the forefront. So I'm thinking about like guns for some reason, because I know that that falls into the energy of what Aries is going into. But what I really feel I think Saturn will bring, because he represents karma and lessons and so forth, I wouldn't be surprised, and this is just one practical example. It's not just going to be this. It's like we're going to see like maybe different gun regulations come forth, or maybe like full circle story arcs be completed, especially because, he's moving from the 12th sign to the first sign. So it's kind of like new beginnings, endings, and teetering that balance, so to speak.
And if someone listening is about to go through their first or second Saturn return, do you have any tips or guidance for them?
It's so funny. I think across the board, a general practical example. So, of course, understand where Aries falls in your chart, where Saturn's at in your chart, and understand the concepts of like what the house represents. But the one thing that I recommend for anyone that's about to go through a Saturn return, whether it's their first, second, or even third, especially their first, is actually to stay very fit and healthy, because what Saturn's going to do is he's going to bear his weight on you with the challenges, the energetic pressure, the momentum that he's really asking you to move forward with. And it's kind of an interesting example, but like lifting heavy weights and pushing back on Saturn's momentum and pressure and lessons and challenges that he's bestowing upon you is really supportive, because it just kind of brings up not only a physical type of strength, but emotional, mental, spiritual, and so forth.
I love that. And I was having dinner with my friend the other night, and we were talking about our Saturn returns because we both just were wrapping up this cycle. And I reflected something in that conversation that I feel really called to share, which was that for me, my Saturn return was really about releasing levels of fear, letting go of
Mm.
old levels of fear, and fear from so many different areas of my life, like family, society, lifestyle, and we always talk here in the spiritual space around choosing that authentic path. So like letting go of that old conditioning of what I should do, in order to pursue this business path, and just letting go of so much of the fear that I had around it. So I can say for me personally, it's really, if I really just distill it down or think about it, there's a lot of power in kind of letting go of that fear and realizing as you mature and as you come out of the Saturn return that you are so much more powerful than you give yourself credit for.
Absolutely. It's glow up energy. It's not fun in the process, but I think that I guess darkness, if you will, because I mean, and don't get me wrong, everyone's like some people have fantastic Saturn returns. Like I see so many people go through like, they have babies and they get married and all of that. And I think that for those that are going through a more challenging Saturn return, it does pay off because you are reflected back to you like your own strength. So I love that comment.
Yeah, definitely. It's so fascinating. And I'm so curious to see what Saturn moving into Aries will bring, because I feel like there's a whole new cycle emerging, a whole new area of being and collective area of being.
It feels that way, especially as like, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're getting that preview, if you will, during a numerological year 9, which is like all about shedding and releasing and letting go what no longer serves you, either by force or free will. So, Saturn being in that sign, and then us seeing, Uranus going into Gemini, and Pluto has already moved into Aquarius, and also Neptune going into Aries. He's already there, actually. The fact that a lot of the outer planets have shifted in this year, it's not by coincidence. I think it's by design by a higher power, because no one can control the planets,
Absolutely. And with Uranus changing signs, because that's another big collective shift that we're going to be going through this summer, can you share with us your thoughts on that transit and what could be coming down the pipeline there?
Yeah. So by nature, I'm actually a very like predictive reader. And it's so interesting. Like the more that I've grounded into my lower 3, the less I kind of gear towards predictions. But a lot of, I would say, like maybe pop astrologers or just, TikTok famous popular astrologers, which I love, like consuming that information. Don't get me wrong. They do give the example of usually the Uranus and Gemini transit speaks to, here in the US, like Civil War energy. But I think on like an energetic component and that kind of level, just because Gemini represents communications, either by verbal or written, and all types of form of communications, and Uranus is the planet that represents doing things differently, being a little bit unconventional, sudden change. I'm really curious to see now that with Pluto in Aquarius, what Uranus and Gemini brings with respect to AI and different forms in which and how we're communicating even on platforms and communicating with one another, and maybe additional like social media platforms. So I think the way in which we connect, how we communicate, I feel like that might look a little bit different and evolve possibly even for the better with Uranus and Gemini.
So interesting. Yeah, it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how it unfolds, because Uranus is so unpredictable.
Yeah.
So
totally.
It's like we don't even know what's going to get shaken up right now.
Well, I'm just happy. Like we talked a little bit about this. He does not like being in the sign of Taurus, and I think it's more like neutral energy with him going into Gemini, but he's leaving my second house in Taurus right now, and I can't wait, because the different types and the different ways in which I've made income for myself, which usually is what the second house represents in a chart, I'm very excited to be moving away from that energy.
Hell yeah. Yes. And it's funny because for me, Uranus is moving into my second house, which represents money. And I'm kind of excited because I'm like ready to make money in new and different unconventional ways.
Yes.
So I'm embracing it. We'll see what happens.
There are opportunities at the end of the day, for sure.
Absolutely. And then with that being said, I just realized another transit we haven't talked about yet, which is Jupiter changing signs this summer, which is also exciting. And you've got the Cancer energy, and Jupiter's moving into Cancer. So let's talk about that.
I don't know how you felt when Mars was ping-ponging back between Cancer and Leo, beginning like back in September of 2024.
Horrible. That's horrible.
I've never. So my Chiron's in Leo. It's in my 5th house. And so my 4th and my 5th have a lot of Cancer Leo energy. And girl, I was going through it. She went through I would say periods of darkness, but it was necessary inner child, lower 3 chakra work. So all this to say, Mars does not like being in the sign of Cancer whatsoever. So but that time was not in vain, because Jupiter is about to bless those exact spots wherever, especially Cancer is at in your chart, and it's going to pay off. So basically, Jupiter in Cancer, he's exalted in Cancer. And I think what we're going to see on a collective level is an increase in birth rates. And of course, wherever Cancer falls in your chart, those areas are going to be blessed based on what that house represents. I also think people are going to be moving quite a bit because Jupiter in Cancer brings a lot of physical moves from one home to a new home and lots of travel. And so anyways, June, because June is Cancer season, Jupiter is going to become conjunct with the sun, and it's around summer solstice. Like those 4 to 5 days are just going to be like, I think, really optimal, beautiful, prime energy to take advantage of, with Jupiter being in Cancer and it being Cancer season. So June, I think from an astrological perspective, is the best month this year.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Totally. Yeah.
I love that. Anything else coming up this summer that we should be aware of, or just general thoughts on the energy?
I think some tips of advice, no matter what, because again, the planets are going to do no matter what they're going to do,
Yeah.
and no one can control it. I think that's like a higher consciousness, higher being, however you identify, God, source, universe. But grow through what you go through, because the only way out is through. And I feel like it's all mindset too. I think if you look at it with a positive perspective, and I think that's where doing the work really comes forth and like pays off, like you're going to be able to navigate it and you're going to get something from it.
I love that. That's such beautiful advice. Yeah. I keep saying that the only way out is through,
Totally. Yeah. Especially doing this work. And I mean, like, it's really challenging when you're in it. And I try not to use the word hard because I feel like it's a little bit more limiting, whereas like the word challenging presents opportunities for growth. I'm not going to undermine it. It's kind of brutal at times, depending on whatever you're supposed to be learning and what you're growing and becoming. But it always pays off no matter what.
Absolutely. Yes. So I can't wait to hear more about your perspectives on astrology, Gabrielle. Can you share with us what style of astrology that you work with and
Yeah.
what system you use?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different schools of thoughts out there. I study Placidus because that's what I studied with my teachers. And it makes sense for me now because I do incorporate the component of numerology into my readings. So I like to look at the symbolic energy of what the numbers are across the board for whatever planet I think is dominant in a chart. But I truly just studied Placidus and Placidus is the one that has like more specific numbers. It shows all the numbers. It's not as evenly divided as whole sign traditionally. So the houses look a little bit bigger or smaller depending on how close to the equator that you were born. So, yeah, I studied Placidus because that's just what I started with, and I really enjoy it. But I do think that all systems are pretty much similar in what you're going to get in terms of like the message that you're supposed to receive. Just the way that you get there's a little bit different depending on the style of astrology that you study.
And how do you work with numerology with astrology? What does that look like?
Yeah. So say like, for example, you're like a Cancer rising. So I'm going to look to the moon to see like where that's at in your chart because it's going to hold a little bit of extra weight, so to speak. And then I'm going to look at the number/degree that that moon is sitting at. And then I'm going to go deeper with respect to the essence, the energy, what the number symbolizes, and go from there. And that's one of the core pieces that I incorporate into my readings across the board.
Can you explain to us, because this is an area of astrology that I don't know a lot about and I'm fascinated by. Can you explain to us about degree theory and the different degrees in astrology, like in a simple way for someone who's like new, who's
Yeah.
new?
Well, there's a couple ways that you could go about it. There's what's called the Sabian symbols, and you're going to really get into like literally what the degrees mean. I mean, I am familiar with them, but that's not my main focus. I quite literally look at Pythagorean numerology, which is the studies of numbers 1 through 9. And then you have like some of the master numbers. And based on what I've studied and what those meanings are, then I combine the two and I apply that for the astrology. And
Cool.
yeah, I am I would say I'm a natural psychic, but I'm also a trained psychic. And then I incorporate and I marry my intuitive gifts. And, I present whichever area of life that my clients are seeking support with, and we go from there. And we tailor the reading to that.
So depending on the degree that a planet is falling in the chart, that can have the number degree influences its expression. Is that Am I interpreting
Yeah.
that correctly?
Yeah.
That's so cool and interesting.
It's a little different. And it feels like it came to me, especially during I would say that was back in 2022. And I was just closing up my Saturn return. So it's a very karmic time.
Yeah, for sure. And what are some of the main things that you look at in someone's chart when you're first doing a reading for them that pull your focus?
Yeah. So I quite literally, like, I like to do more specific views and then like more kind of like blown out, larger perspective views. So I'm quite literally going to, if I'm just taking a glance at the chart, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to see where is the most energy occurring within a chart. Like, where are the planets teetering towards? Are there stelliums? Are there houses that are a little bit more dominant than the others? And then I usually have my clients fill out a form, like, they're usually interested in areas of like career, money, love, health, and so forth. And I'm going to see based off of what the energy of what the chart has and like how maybe say like the fourth house is a little bit more dominant. And then I'm going to look into their question and then kind of put all the two together, however it is, and go from there.
And I have to interrupt this podcast episode to tell you about a product that I am absolutely obsessed with and have been loving so much. And that is Elix Cycle Balance. This incredible women's hormonal health supplement that was created on the foundation of Chinese medicine helps you balance your hormones so that you can feel better every single day of your cycle. For me, this incredible supplement helped me on my journey getting off of hormonal birth control and has helped me feel so good. I have so much energy. I have very limited physical symptoms, especially during my cycle, and I just feel good. So I cannot recommend this stuff to you enough. I am not a huge supplement person. I don't take a ton of supplements. So for me, it's just my daily multivitamin and this and some elderberry that I take for immune support, and that's it. And this has really changed the game for me. If you want to give it a try, go ahead, check out the link in the show notes, and use code 15EmilyL for 15% off. And so when you're looking at someone's chart and you're seeing that they have a stellium, which is multiple planets in one house, and you're seeing that there's a lot of energy there, how does that influence someone's life or their purpose or their expression? Like how would you explain that?
Yeah. So like, for example, like we'll say with the fourth house stellium. So say there's like 3 or more planets in that one house in the same constellation. Because Placidus, you could have what are called intercepted houses. So like 2 signs are in one house. But I'll take into consideration like what the planets are, what the house represents. And I almost kind of see it as like an escalator. So it's like, okay, it's going to have like a base level 1 energy. But if there's a stellium in say the fourth house, then it's going to have like a layer 2, layer 3, and it's going to hold a different kind of weight. It's going to be expressed differently and it's going to have a different meaning for the client that I'm reading for. And I know it's going to have additional importance. So I'll look at the house, I'll look at the planet. I will tap into my intuition and obviously my technical training as an astrologist and go from there. So usually like with the stellium, since we're on this example, it's just going to have like an extra amount of weight and importance. And the way it's going to play out in that client's chart is what we're going to get into in a reading.
And when it comes to, for some reason, I feel called to talk about the moon sign.
Ooh,
so,
okay.
Yeah, how do you work with the moon sign in someone's chart?
So I definitely see it where it falls, but it's really interesting because, and it was so funny. I was getting ready for the podcast today and I started hearing it's like, you're going to talk about the Vedic example. And I was like, okay. So with the moon sign in a chart, my teacher taught me this. She studied Vedic for a long time, but she's more of a tropical Placidus astrologer. And she said that our moon sign is our sun sign in a previous lifetime. So that's actually how I look at the moon in a chart. So it's like, okay, well, if you were a Pisces moon, which I am, like I was a Pisces in the last life, and I'm basically here, at least I believe, to kind of wrap up my soul contracts. And I don't say that with arrogance, but it's like I'm here to complete the mission from my previous lifetime during this expansion and transition from like say the third, the fourth, and the 5D.
That's fascinating because I know some people will say that like your south node is who you were in a past lifetime.
Totally.
So do you agree with that, or is it more of the moon, or both, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think both apply for sure. And I think that your south node, it's definitely, and I think that also comes back with like, okay, there's different systems, there's different schools of thoughts, but they say the same thing in different ways. So I try not to limit myself in that way. But I think that the south node are gifts that you've incorporated within this lifetime and that you're essentially using to work towards whatever your north node is asking you to complete.
So cool. And what's Vedic astrology for someone who doesn't know?
Vedic is an Eastern style of astrology. I'm not too schooled on the principles, but I just know it's very much like applied to that side of the world, kind of like Chinese astrology is applied to the other side of the world, whereas Western is like Placidus and so forth.
And it's a little bit more karmic, correct?
Feels that way. Yeah. And then the houses are even different too. Like we're looking at a 360-degree wheel where, and don't quote me on this, the Vedic is in like boxes and squares. So, but someone can fact check me on that.
Yeah, no, that's so fascinating. I love how we all find the system that resonates the most with us.
Yeah, totally.
And how about rising sign? Can you explain to us the rising sign and your thoughts on that?
I think the rising sign is more of like, I know this people will say this about their moon, but I feel like the rising sign is truly like the essence of your soul, the soul's vibrational expression. And the sun is kind of like what people see on the outside, whereas I think, and I know that people say this about the moon is more your inner world. I just feel like the rising sign speaks to the essence of your soul at its core and the energy of that constellation.
I love that you say that because the more that I get older, the more I resonate with my rising sign. And I didn't always feel that way when I was younger, but the more that because I'm a Taurus rising, so the more that I connect with that, I like really see my authentic self in a lot of that.
Yeah. I think that's so, you had asked me about what the first thing that I see with respect to people's charts. And that was actually the first thing that I noticed about yours. I was like, oh, she's a Taurus rising. And then I was looking at the other half of your chart and I was like, mediumship. And then you shared in our reading that that's where you started. So I was like, oh, that's on brand. Because usually those with like Taurus, Scorpio energies have the capabilities and skill set to lean into mediumship from the jump.
Absolutely. So where can someone go to look in their chart to find indicators of spiritual gifts?
Ooh, okay, I love it. So on a basic level, the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th houses, those are the psychic houses. But I think everyone's naturally intuitive. And I think that you're just going to work with that skill set in a different way. And your birth chart's going to help you to identify how to do so. You can also see like where your Mercury's at. So like where the water signs fall. But I also think that earth signs, I mean, they all are very intuitive and they have their own gifts. I'd like to think that like, so the water signs are usually what I've noticed. They are related to like clairsentience. And then I've noticed of the earth signs is that they have more of like a claircognizance dominance. And then the fire and the air, I've noticed that claircognizance. And then the clairaudience are with fire and air dominant birth charts.
Wow, that's so fascinating. Interesting. Yeah, I love that.
Have you noticed that?
I have not. No, I'm just like thinking, I'm just like absorbing it and thinking about it and reflecting on that because that's so cool.
Yeah. But your Mercury also, I feel called to share. Your Mercury sign is going to say a lot about how you receive intuitive information. And I would think that's because it's the planet that represents communication in verbal and written forms.
Yeah, definitely. How about where can someone go in their chart to understand their money making abilities?
Yeah. So the second house for sure. That's how you make money by yourself. The 8th house is going to share information and insights about how you make money with maybe a partner or like for familial reasons. But usually like your Venus, you can look to your Venus placement too, because that's going to give you an idea of maybe how money's working out in your life. And you can also look to your 6th and your 10th house in terms of ways to make income, because those are the job houses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about soulmates and relationships?
Ooh, okay. The 5th house, it's, the 8th house is usually related to like sex and whatnot. But the 5th house very much has that energy. And then the seventh house speaks to partnerships. It's quite literally the house that represents marriage and unionship. But you could also look to your Juno asteroid. And Juno is the asteroid that represents marriage. And so to see where that falls in your chart, and then you could look into the house and rulership as well.
That's fascinating. I will have to look at my chart because that's one I haven't looked at yet. That's so cool. So cool.
You can see, like, if say there's a conjunction or a positive aspect, and there's so many rules with astrology, but that's kind of like the quickest way to get there is to see what's going on with those different energies and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I would love to know more about your business, Agua Astrology. Where did that name come from?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. My business name came from me being a triple water sign, but I have a lot of planets in water signs. It's usually between Scorpio, Cancer, and Pisces, so all of those. And it was also, I'm Hispanic and I wanted to pay reverence to my ancestors. I do a lot of ancestral work. And I was going on a walk without my phone, which seems to be the time in which I have direct communication with my guides and higher forms of consciousness. And it just dropped in. And I was like, okay, this is it. So that's where the name came from.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And do you use astrology for doing the ancestral work, or what does that look like in your own life?
Yeah, I do a lot of actually like somatic breath work meditation for ancestral work. I've done a lot of work on my sacral. But I'd use astrology more for practical. So like I cast my business chart and I help other business owners cast their own charts as well for their businesses, or like looking at auspicious states. Yeah, my business, she is a Taurus sun, Pisces moon, Cancer rising. So I work with a lot of feminine clients, females, and I like to support other entrepreneurs using the modalities that I use in my everyday life.
Let's talk about business charts, because I love this topic. And it's so funny. I was just thinking about that the other day, that I hadn't looked at my own business's charts in a while. So for someone listening who wants to take a look at their own business's chart, how would you recommend that they select a time and a date in order to pull the chart?
Yeah, so I've done this before, and there's a couple different ways. There are like specific astrologers that work just on business charts. And, they say like, okay, what was the first time that you received money? Or when did you LLC your business? Or you can even decide like when, your business chart was casted. So there's different ways and different beliefs when it comes to that specific type of astrology reading and type of chart. But what I like to do is I like to ask my fellow entrepreneurs what their intention is in terms of like their business, who's their ideal client, what they want to create with their business, what kind of service that they're going to be providing in their business. And then I go from there and I take into account the type of transits that we have going on, if it works for their natal chart as well, because I look at their natal chart. So I like to do like a well-rounded approach to casting a business chart, but there's a couple different ways that you could go about it.
For me, I ended up choosing the day that I invested in my first ever business coach, because it was like there's so much significance around I'm deciding to start a business and like this is the day where I'm committing to it, and and I sort of feel like that was the day when the energy field of the business sort of spawned into existence. You know what I mean?
Totally. It's like the book. I reference this often on our podcast. It's called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And she's the one that wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And it pretty much speaks to the idea of like, if you have an idea that's coming from the ethers, from a different dimension, and it's coming to you specifically, it's because it wants to be created in the 3D form. And I love that because it feels like the energy of your business chose you as the vessel to live through
Ooh,
it.
yes, I love that perspective so much. And when you're looking at your business chart, I mean, for example, mine's an Aquarius. So,
Oh,
but
okay.
also makes sense with my personal 10th house being an Aquarius. So like there's a lot of connection. But for someone listening who maybe they pull up their business chart and they're like, whoa, like I don't even know how to relate to this energy or what to take a look at. Where do you start? Or where do you start with your clients?
Yeah, well, I'm going to look at their chart for sure. And I'm also going to look at their natal chart, and I'll probably put them together and see how the energy is trying to come forth. But then I'll also get an idea of like, okay, like who is their ideal client? Where are the money houses falling? I'll look at like their midhaven to get an idea of like branding, how it's presenting to the world. So Business charts are a completely different beast, but I really like examining them. And I almost feel as though it's an area of astrology that's not as well explored as maybe like natal astrology
Yeah.
or like transit astrology. And so yeah, there's a lot of depth there. And there's like again specific business astrologists out there that focus on that. But I think there's also such a cool fascination with respect to like business charts because a lot of people, at least for me, this is my observation, doesn't feel like people know as much about them as maybe like they could be.
Oh,
There's cool,
it's untapped.
yeah.
There's so much possibility for that. So, yes, I'm so glad you are sharing that with us on this episode. And like, let's say, for example, you're taking a look at the midheaven for your natal chart and your business's chart, and they're different. Where do you go? Or do you blend both of them? Or like, what would you
Yeah.
think
I
about?
so there's also schools of thought too with other spiritual entrepreneurs that you like they don't brand outside of themselves. Like they really just work with their own birth chart. For me, I consider my business to be an entity that's separate from myself. So I usually start with the business chart and I'm looking at the midheaven. So say for example, you're a Scorpio rising, and I'm thinking of like Lana Del Rey. They say Taylor Swift's one. They Katy Perry. They're all Scorpio rising, so that means that they have Leo midheavens, and so they have very specific like eras, right? And they're branding themselves with the specific storylines. They have different energies to each of the different types of musics or albums that they put out, and that's very much Leo, right? It's telling a story. It's at the forefront. So you would look to the midheaven to get an idea of what that constellation represents, how it wants to be presented, and go from there.
That's so cool. So interesting. Everyone listening to this is going to be go pull up their business chart right
Yeah.
now as they're listening.
And again, that's just one example. I mean, again, untapped energy for the business astrology. I feel like there's so many different ways that you could go about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the one thing that I find the more that I'm in business, the more that my business starts to run itself. I
Well, that's so nice.
I realize that it's kind of its own consciousness that has its own desires and expressions. And I find that the more that you recognize that, the earlier on as a business owner that you go, the more that you see it as a co-creation and less of like, this is me in business form. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Definitely. I'm going to sit with that one because it feels like there's medicine there for me.
Well, for sure.
Yeah.
And also it taps into what you said about how your business is often a consciousness that chooses you, that wants to be born into human form.
I really believe that, especially as we're in this whole Pluto and Aquarius era. It just feels like so many females, especially, I mean, that's just because maybe that's the population that I work with the most. What I've seen in readings is that I'm like, yeah, your business, like the type of business, it doesn't even exist yet. Like you're literally going to be bringing this new type of business to life. So I'm really excited to see what the spiritual business world, this community looks like in the next 5 years, because it feels like niche business ideas are going to be at the forefront in the spiritual space.
And when it comes to tapping more into your divine feminine energy, is there somewhere we can go to look in the birth chart or things that you practice in your daily life that you would find helpful that someone listening might need to know about?
Yeah, I would probably see like where the feminine constellations fall within your birth chart. But on a practical level, like what I'm doing, because it's fairly new to me to be leaning more towards that because I was in my masculine for so long. What I've found is being in the darkness, doing the inner work, even doing nothing, spending time in nature, going for a walk without any technology, that's really supported me with leaning into my feminine. And I've actually even had easier cycles as a result. And that's been really interesting to observe now, thinking back too.
I never thought about the constellations being masculine or feminine.
Yeah. Yeah. And like saying, like, see, like where, they fall in your chart. But I mean, this is an example that comes to mind, and I've heard this as a school of thought too in this space. The desire to be closer to water, because water is innately feminine. So spending time in like by the water, or by the lake or the ocean, wherever it is that you're located, in the bath, in the shower, asking the water to cleanse you. That's very divine feminine approach.
Mm-hmm. So are all three water signs feminine constellations?
Oh gosh, was not prepared for that question. I do
Oh.
not believe so. I don't think Scorpio is. I think it's masculine, but don't
Yeah,
quote me on that. Someone can
that
fact check
makes
me.
sense.
Yeah, but
Okay.
Cancer is, and I want to say Pisces is too.
Yeah. Interesting. Just all interesting reflections. I love it.
I love that for you though, and for the
Yes,
audience.
absolutely. And Gabrielle, can you share a little bit with us about your podcast?
Yeah, I actually was going to ask you to come on, so I would love to have you on if you feel called to
Of
do that.
course, I would love it. Yes.
So yeah, I host with my sisters, and we just talk about where we're at in our process and our journeys, and we talk about what areas are interesting to us now. We talk about astrology. My sister is into a lot of psychotherapy work. She does a lot of like IFS. She's actually a trained therapist and licensed therapist as well. And she does a lot of subconscious reprogramming work. We talk about ancestral work, like truly any topic that's in this space we speak to, and it's in like no order. It's like very much what comes to us. We're going to showcase that as well as other guests that are experts in their field and go from there.
And can you share with us the name of your podcast again?
Yeah, it's the Spiritual Sisters podcast.
I love that so much. And you shared with me before we hit record today that you've been connecting with shamanic work recently. So do you want to share a little bit about how that's unfolded for you?
Yeah. So my shaman, she really focuses on the lower three chakras and grounding. And, I think for me personally, it's easier to be in the upper four. I don't know about you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But so grounding is like being here on earth, focusing on like the literal, day-to-day needs, your basic needs, your relationship to money, your creative, your sexual energy, your power, your I am. And I focus a lot on that with her. And the way that that's looked like is quite literally me being in the darkness and doing a lot of the subconscious reprogramming work has been my experience. But it's also really like been the catalyst for me to jump more into my divine feminine in the last 5 to 10 months. So yeah, that's where I'm at with the shamanic journey. Really like almost kind of, I don't want to say manipulating the energy, but really like wielding the energy to work for me so that I can live in a timeline that it's in my greatest and highest good. And through my teachings and learnings, I like to help my clients do the same thing. And that's the focus of my shamanic work for sure. But yeah, that's also
I'm
about that.
obsessed with that. Yeah. And I mean, to answer the question, it's something I'm dancing with every single day. How can
Yeah.
I be more present and more grounded and be a more grounded teacher for you, my dear listener? And also how I can balance, because being such a Pisces, like I have such a rich internal world, and finding the balance between both, the spiritual and the physical. It's a dance. It's an everyday dance.
Yeah, it's a calling, and it is a job that requires us to live in between two different worlds at the same time. And it's challenging. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And Gabrielle, where can people find you and how can they work with you right now?
Thank you for asking. They can find me at Agua Astrology or at the Spiritual Sisters podcast. You can find me on my website at www.aguaastrology.com. I'm also available on Etsy for written readings that are my low tier offerings. And I do have a course coming out, which is an on-demand tarot course, and that's available through the Teachable platform on my online school, which is Agua Astrology Academy.
Beautiful. I love this.
Yeah.
And of course, we have to wrap up the episode today by hearing, what does being a mystic mean to you?
Ooh, okay. It means to be consciously expanded on all different levels: emotional, spiritual, mentally, physically, so as to be closer with the oneness. And that starts by doing the work.
Yes. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And any final tips for living a more mystical life?
Ooh, just make time for stillness, make time to understand yourself a little bit better. And it can be as simple as just starting with 5 minutes of quiet time and follow the breadcrumbs from there, because I know that the signs will be presented to you if you're willing to get curious and explore what else is out there beyond these realms.
It's such a beautiful answer. And one of the coolest things that I find with any spiritual system, whether it be astrology or human design or whatever it is, it's so cool to me because I always see something different whenever I look at my own charts,
Mm-hmm.
or whenever I go to have a reading from someone like you. I always see there's always something new that comes out that's like a new aspect of self that I wasn't ready for maybe 2 years ago or 2 months ago or whatever it is. So it's just so fascinating to me how new things will reveal themselves to you with time.
Totally. Like you're meant to see it when you're supposed to see it.
But you also have to create that space, like what you're talking about, the quiet moments to
Yeah.
like be ready to see
Yeah.
what's there to be revealed, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's where the divine feminine comes in. It's like doing the work so as to create the space, because the divine feminine is what sustains the masculine.
Hell yeah. Beautiful. Such a perfect way to end this episode.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabrielle, for coming on the show. It was an absolute pleasure.